Taylor?
I think I'll work. You like it? It's good.
Has everyone had a chance to look at the agenda?
Yes.
Have.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
Make it so move.
I second it.
Okay.
That's just right. Good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Next item is approval of the minutes from the May 19th meeting. Any corrections or additions?
On page 4, it has toward the bottom, and I'm using page numbers, this is printed out on my but there was a motion and a second, but it didn't record the vote. Third paragraph from the bottom. Okay.
Page 4, third paragraph?
Third from the bottom.
Is there a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Chris and Pete? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. First item is outdoor dining and parking, proposed text amendment. And you have a staff report
Yes, sir.
that Kevin has presented, and I'm sure he'll want to go over a little bit of that with you.
like to do that. Appreciate the subcommittee meeting the past couple of weeks and studying this issue. We've kind of been back and forth with it some, and we met again last week, and there was a suggestion from the subcommittee that the parking for outdoor dining be based on a square footage comparable to what is used on the gross square footage of the building to arrive at a parking space. As proposed in this draft, the parking for outdoor dining would be one space per 250 square feet of the outdoor area used for that. No longer, as proposed, based on seating. The outdoor seating, though, would still be regulated by the restroom fixture count based on occupancy calculations, whether it's by tables and chairs or standing room only. Tables and chairs has a 15 square foot per person count, and then standing room only is 5 square feet per person. So if you just had an area based on its square footage, that would equate to a number of people, and then convert to a square fixture count based on the building code. The draft ordinance still maintains a hold harmless provision in the application of these new standards on the existing restaurants. That would prevent any existing restaurant from losing outdoor dining seats from the original number, not from the last couple of years of the expansion, but would go back to the seating count as quantified in '06, or whatever had been issued by a special or conditional use permit, or sometimes a zoning permit. So with these new changes, we wouldn't want to see any restaurant lose seats from that number back 15, 16 years ago. So revised draft ordinance for your review and consideration. It would be a new section of the ordinance in the commercial design standards, as this applies to town center and central business, the dining for those areas. Not much has changed, except we get to item 3. Any impervious surface increases 500 square feet or less. So we knew that there's going to be a requirement for the surfaces to be ADA accessible. So there'll be some occasion where gravel is added. Well, gravel's not ADA accessible. We found that to be true. But if they do pave it, or concrete or pavers or something that's going to have that solid surface, there's going to be an increase in impervious area. But in general, if it's not any more than 500 square feet, the effect is not that noticeable or that great. So I put this provision in there that anything 500 square feet or less would not have to adhere to any additional stormwater detention requirements. If it's over that, then they would need to offset that impervious by taking some existing impervious and turning it back to pervious or planted or landscaped area, or provide some kind of a detention system if it's much greater than that. That's item 3. 4 is still the same, I believe. We had language in number 5 about barriers on protection of the public and protection of those people that are sitting outside the dining area. 6 is the same, not allowing dining areas in the designated parking areas. And then 8, this is the change that we came about from the subcommittee meeting last week, that the dining seats is limited by these parking calculations, one space for every 250 square feet of outdoor dining. I don't know if there's anything else that was amended. So that's kind of the summary we came back to from the subcommittee, and we presented that to you in a draft ordinance that would go forward if you like the way it is, or we can make some changes to it tonight. I'd be glad to answer any questions regarding this proposed ordinance on outdoor dining.
Any questions? Sam?
I've got a couple questions. I'm curious how outdoor dining area is defined. Because I can think of like just different examples of, like, how is that going to be calculated for any given restaurant? Indoor
Outdoor
space.
dining is defined, but I guess the space is not clearly defined.
Yeah.
It would be the space that you're going to be serving food, that you're going to have a table or chairs, or an area that's going to be devoted to that type of activity.
Just feels like there could be a lot of variation in that from time to time, year to year, season to season, things of that nature. So I think about like, you think about Town Tavern, they've got all that space in the front that they typically don't use for dining, but they could put a table there. So what happens if one weekend they're gonna be really good, July 4th, and they say, oh, we wanna have more seating? Are they then required to come and somehow obtain and show more parking for that one weekend if they're gonna take it away? Just feels a bit vague for me in how it's defined, whereas like an indoor, it's pretty clear, it's inside of the walls. Or even like, take Speckled Trout, they've got the barriers set up, but not all that's used for dining purposes. And so I'm just curious how much of that, or even like the spaces in between tables or things of that nature, is that taken into account for it? That's my, I think, one worry with moving to the idea of a square footage based versus a table and space in an outdoor area. So I don't know if you guys talked about that last time, sorry I wasn't here, or if you guys talked about that in the subcommittee, but.
Another thing to consider is when you look at all the other communities around us, nobody has these requirements. We tend to be the only one. And I think one has to ask themselves is, do we really need restriction in parking? I mean, I've talked to a lot of people around town, and one of the comments I thought was interesting, he said, even on the 4th of July, somehow people find a parking place. And that's our worst weekend of the year as far as congestion and parking. And I guess it just goes back to the fact that, we have a parking issue. I don't see us solving the parking issue or the outdoor dining issue and parking issue separately. I think they're connected. That's my opinion. And so I just have to ask myself, is there a need for this at all? Thoughts?
Yeah,
I think the parking stipulation could be eliminated from the proposal.
My other question, which is related to that, is I was curious if there's any talk of the Roger Brooks study that the town just undertook not too long ago, because there's, I think, like 30 mentions of outdoor dining in that study, and it's all about how do we encourage more of it, how do we encourage more of a variety, and I wonder if this parking stipulation actually discourages people from opening restaurants, expanding them, doing more, having more seating, less wait times. That's what they talked a lot about in that. I'm just curious if you guys, if that was ever brought up in the subcommittee, if you guys talked about how this fits with that vision and those, 25 bullet points that he laid out there.
Well, I'll go back to your very first question,
Sure.
because there were like 8 more in a row.
Yeah, sorry.
The first one was about defining the outdoor dining, and for an example of Town Tavern, I think it's pretty clear where their outdoor dining is, the patio and the area that they use. So currently they're limited to 45 seats. Everybody in this room knows they got more than 45 seats out there.
That's right.
Especially since we've relaxed the enforcement of it. So this approach is saying, this is your area. And I measured it, going forward and drafting this up, I measured the area, and they've got enough parking to support the restaurant as a whole, based on the square footage, and the area that they define as their patio, what they use. Yes, they got some places where people are waiting and playing cornhole, and the transition area waiting on that. So, but I didn't count that. I just counted the area, and this would say, we don't care how many seats you have in the area, but the area equals a parking calculation. a space based on square footage. Now, what does limit the number of seats is, do you have enough restroom fixtures, facilities to support both inside and outside? If you don't, your number is going to be just like that, kind of over on that placket over there, how many people can be in this room, an occupancy calculation. So that would go along. Everyone's got to come back in once we establish an ordinance and a deadline to apply to fix this out. And then we would say, this is how many seats you can have. Will there be times on a busy weekend that it goes over? Probably. Has that happened in the past? Every year. But we're trying to get a hold of something to go forward with. If we don't have any parking standard, fine, that's for this group to make a recommendation. One of the other questions was about the Roger Brooks thing. And that was a study and a presentation. And supporting outdoor dining, and I don't think anyone's opposed to outdoor dining, and we want to support that and we want to see that. But the other thing that came out of that was what? The greatest problem we have in this town was parking. And so the subcommittee said, maybe we don't need to just turn it wide open. There needs to be some kind of correlation between the number of outdoor seats, because we have it now, and a parking space. Maybe we allow a little bit more flexibility than what we have, and I think that the 1 per 250 square feet does that. It does give some people some more flexibility. So that's my take on kind of what the subcommittee brought forward. And I'll let them speak to that issue, those questions and some others.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just one quick thing on the space outside. I wonder if it perhaps does the opposite, and then somebody says, oh, well, we don't have the right parking requirements. We'd rather have indoor than outdoor, and so they just don't have any outdoor seating because they don't want that to be defined as that area. So I'd be curious, like, it's easy to look at now because it's where they have tables, but if they just took all their tables out, would that still be part of the calculation? They would have to have enough parking because there is an outdoor space for dining, or would that?
If someone's going to choose as a business decision to not have outdoor dining, I think that'll be a detriment to their business.
Well, maybe. It depends on the style of business and what that is. I think just one more thing about it, and I'll just be quiet, but I'm curious on this, like how many, if we counted all the outdoor dining seats, what percentage of the total people that are in town at any given time would that actually be? I'm not convinced that solving this is going to have any real impact on parking one way or the other, like it's in any significant sense of it. And that kind of to what you're saying, I'm just curious if this is even the right thing to be. I think council asked us to take a look at this, but I'm just curious how much of this is actually going to have any sort of significant impact versus I can see a potential for some detrimental impacts in terms of limiting or discouraging more outdoor dining, less wait times, more places to go and eat, and that kind of thing. So
I'll let the subcommittee answer that.
no real question there. That's just my kind of thoughts on it.
So from my perspective, like just step back. So I think we'd all agree that in the macro scheme, if there's a deficit of hundreds of parking spaces, that a restaurant doesn't change that in a significant impact kind of way. But I think the bit to step back was we have a parking code, we have a land use code, but I mean, if you think about it, every land use in town has a parking requirement, whether it's a house or a restaurant or a hotel, they all have parking requirements.
Even retail does, right?
Yeah, right, exactly, right? And so institutional does, I mean, everything has a requirement of build this, you have to have spaces off-street. It's like you build a house, you have to have parking, everything in those places. So or apartments, whatever. And so take that step back for a moment and just say, does a single house, whatever. I mean, does it singly matter? No, but in the macro, does it matter? I think the answer is yes, that you have parking demand being created by uses in aggregate. And I think the question the question is, this demand is being created, so where is it coming from? Well, it's coming from everything. And why would you carve off part of a restaurant and say this part of the restaurant isn't subject to the same requirements that the inside of the restaurant is, or that a retail, non-restaurant, a non-food establishment retail would be, right? I mean, they all have requirements. Like how it's measured part of this, I mean, the idea was, I believe we're all in favor of flexibility, right? And so it's a nice day, put tables out, and that's great. And that's a great thing, it really is. But the concept of like counting seats and counting stools clearly causes a lot of angst. And I mean, like the enforcement, like not my job, but to do that. But I mean, it just seems to me problematic. And sort of the concept, if you look at all of 8 of these conditions, of you got to create a space and it has to be ADA accessible. I mean, I don't know how it's measured exactly, but that concept of what are you making ADA accessible is a way to think about your first question of how are you going to define the space? Well, you're putting your tables or stools, whatever they are, somewhere. And the town has to be able to review that plan and make sure it meets building code. And that's, in my mind anyway, that would be how the town could enforce it. The beauty of that then is once the town's done that and issued the permit, that space is defined. And they don't have to go out and count stools and tables on a weekend and say, well, gosh, you're only allowed to have 65 and you've got 95. Like that goes away, which is a benefit of the whole thing. But Sam, I think to your initial thing, just the concept of isn't trying to solve the town's parking problems so much as make sure that all of the land uses in town, regardless of what they are a part of the overall plan. And that really where it comes back to. And then I think Kevin mentioned this. I think the square feet thing, which it makes sense if you think about how the square feet is calculated inside the building. If you do it for outside the building, it's less restrictive than the current code, so it's a loosening in that regard. But because the kitchen is what the kitchen is, and the storeroom is what the storeroom is, that kind of thing. So
Those are good points. Yeah, those are very valid points. I think, and it does give them more flexibility than they've had before. Okay? And the other thing is, in life, you learn that you're probably better off when you have some sort of rules or some sort of limits. It's just having no limits is always a little risky. And the other thing is, if you think about it, you don't want to create a disincentive for them to eliminate parking, to put tables and chairs and do away with parking, because that's a real problem, because that makes it even worse. So I understand that side of it too. That's very good.
You remember
curious.
offhand which restaurants have been permitted for additional spaces since 2006? There's Trout has. I couldn't think of. What about the market?
Yes,
That would be.
They increased their patio.
yes. Market. It's on here. They're approved for 32 through their conditional use permit. Because originally they had 4 chairs outside.
That's a big swing.
And that has changed from what he had. Speckled trout, they had 14. Now they're approved for 40. Mellow mushroom, that's not really fair because they were down on Sunset, but now they're approved for 24. Bestseller, 16. Sixpence Pub, they didn't have any when they came in, but when they tore down Sonny's, then they were allowed 32. Story Street Grill, 32 with their CUP. The Ale House, 4. This would give them probably some more opportunities. Not what
Well, I counted.
what he came up with after the meeting, the very next night, but yeah, I mean, they could certainly do more than what they're what they've got approved for, and still preserve some parking. And we understand there's gonna be special events and things are gonna be a little bit different from time to time, but to have something to measure with, based on something that's submitted to us. This is our dining area, this is what we want to use, and there may be some changes at El Rincon and some other restaurants coming forward. And it also is for the new restaurant that has yet to be built. Maybe this on a 7-acre piece, they've got something. They may pop up somewhere. As a change in use, are they providing what they can? And so.
I'm curious, so I appreciate that, there's some good insight in there. I'm curious on the, additional land use requirements around other uses. How many of those have an outdoor provision that's separate from their indoor? Like, let's take a retail store, the wine shop, for example. Does their parking include like their deck area that they would have, or a non-restaurant that has outdoor space for retail? Does that calculation go into what they are required for parking wise, or is this just for restaurants? I mean, I know this is, but are restaurants the only ones that are regulated in that sense?
You're talking about like Ball Guy?
Sure, yeah, Ball Guy. I mean, Ball Guy's kind of a weird mixture, but like, let's say, any of those retail stores that maybe have outdoor space that they theoretically could, and some do, put racks of clothes out there, things of that nature.
No, and our code doesn't currently do that.
Right.
The code regulates outdoor dining and has for a long time. We've just kind of tweaked the numbers here up and down over the years. If it's a retail shop and someone is sitting on the front porch, I mean, there's not a regulation to require parking for someone that has been shopping. The square footage calculation is based on the intensity of that use, the number of employees that would be expected. You take the square footage of a retail or an office sometimes might be more, but in the downtown, they're considered the same as far as square footage per space. But a restaurant's gonna have a lot more people, a lot more turnover, just by the nature of the use. To serve 20 people that are at a restaurant, it takes several people to provide that service. Where at a retail shop, you might have 2 people working for the 300 people that might come in and out during the day.
Just probably outdoor display of products and sales not permitted, I would think, in downtown.
No, they are, and they can, you can go up and down the street, and they're limited to making sure there's at least 5 feet of public sidewalk available.
Okay.
And so some places, they have a little bit more, just before you get to Killwinds, they have a little more offset, they can have some stuff out. If you get further down, and it's limited in space, our sidewalks aren't very wide, and there are requirements on leaving that open. I don't know if I answered you, Sam, but.
Yeah, no, that's good.
it's
I'm
good
just,
to stab
I'm just
at.
trying to wrap my head around it, and how it makes sense or not. Yeah,
There's always that concern of, are we going to negatively impact
yeah.
existing restaurants?
This reminds me a lot of the density discussion that we had not too long ago here, and sort of how we ultimately got rid of it because we decided there were other factors that were actually defining the space and what density should be, and we actually were saying we want more density, and so I just wonder if this is potentially in similar vein to that, because it's not that it's unlimited, the number of seats they can have, because that's still limited, like you mentioned, by restrooms and things of that nature, so they are limited. It truly seems more like a parking. It's whether or not we want to adjust this from a parking standpoint versus a capacity standpoint, because they're sort of, I guess they kind of both play a part in that, but.
They do, yeah.
But how, like, the ones that are, like, I don't know, downtown that have been here for a while, like maybe Story Street, or like those parking requirements, like, are gonna be different, right?
Story Street's kind of limited. I mean, they built an area that were approved for 32 seats on the back deck.
Right.
And they're supposed to have 9 spaces still under the building and then out in the back part of the parking lot. I don't know that they could get any more seats. If they did, I mean, once you start laying them out, there's just so much room that you can have, that you're not standing on top of somebody trying to get through to serve. You know, as a planning board, y'all are providing a recommendation. The subcommittee is to study that a little bit more in detail. And I think this draft, it came out of the subcommittee, and it does that and gives some flexibility from what the code currently requires. And that would be an advantage for probably all the restaurants that have outdoor dining with this provision. Again, the hold harmless portion of it does not penalize them if they can't get more, but it's kind of a halfway regulation. Not opening the door wide open, but maybe cracking the window a little bit.
Okay. Good discussion.
Any other comments? Questions? Ready for a vote?
You want to have any public comment?
Yeah.
Have you-
Yeah, is there anybody out there wants to provide some input? Not a public hearing, but we'd be glad to hear it. I guess the motion would be to send the draft to town council for public hearing.
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make that motion with the language that Kevin has provided to us.
Is there a second? Pete, second. All in favor, indicate.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
5-2?
Mhm. All right, next item, short-term rentals, also text amendment.
Okay, I brought this to you in April, I believe, in response to a Court of Appeals decision coming out of Wilmington dealing with their short-term rental regulations. And some of the issues with what were coming out of Wilmington were they had a lottery program to be able to do short-term rentals, and then a registration program too, which ours was kind of similar to that. And so we brought something to council after we met with you in April, and we decided to come back and work the language a little bit and keep a permitting process, which we checked with the School of Government. We do have the rights to do that. If you're changing the use from single family and you're going to go to another use classification in our code, it's short-term rental, that you need to get a zoning permit to make sure that you're meeting that part of the standard of the ordinance. Now, this is not to expand it in any new areas in town. It's for those zoning districts that can allow short-term rental. And we pulled back some of the things that we struck out from the original ordinance. And there's just a few things here that we've changed in the draft. Keeping permit process, eliminating the registration and the yearly renewal, taking that out, and adding that local contact or management company clearly posted on the inside of the dwelling unit. I think that was on there, but we clarified the language a little bit. And I think that's it. We're gonna do that, have zoning permits, but not a registration process that's yearly in nature. Be glad to answer any questions as we move forward on this, trying to stay in tune and in step with the general statutes and not get sideways with other communities either.
Are we ready for questions and comments?
Take any questions?
This is a hot topic, and I've had probably a dozen conversations with folks around town about this. And I'll share this with you too. The Blowing Rock Civic Association did a survey of the folks we have in our 800-person database. And we asked them to express their top concerns as far as what affects them and their family and their way of life in Blowing Rock, and also what impacts property values. And of the top 5, if you look at this, the third most important issue for the town residents is protecting neighborhoods from short-term rentals. And 42.11% of the citizens surveyed said that was their top concern. And so what that says to me, and I think would indicate to the community, is this is an issue that the residents they're talking about this, and they're very concerned about this. And so I think I'm totally in favor of the permitting process, because I think we need to know who's doing it. And I guess my first question is, what's the status of all those permits that were out there that were like, since 2020, we haven't enforced, if I understand that correctly? Are they still in effect?
I don't know what we're talking about as far as enforcing.
So enforcing the fact that they had to have the permit, they had to pay the fee and they had to renew it annually, but we've not enforced that since COVID, right? Since 2020?
No, we've enforced it.
You have it? We have been enforcing it?
Nothing's changed. with it.
Okay, so if in this new permitting process, we issue permits to all those that have gone through that process before? Is that the thought?
That's what we will do. Instead of requiring, statute will not allow us to charge a registration fee.
Right.
But we will issue a permit to those that have applied. Back when this was enacted in 2018, and those that applied and legally could do it, they made an application. And so we'll issue a zoning permit once and for all that will say you're good to do short-term rental. And we'll do an inspection, make sure you've got the
Everything?
smoke detectors and 911 address and the listing of the property management company or the responsible person inside the building.
Okay. Another issue, and these are going to be random, but I went on the town website today and I thought, okay, I'm a homeowner and I want to do short-term rental. How do I get started? And it's a little hard to find the regulations and the code, and I wish that were more prominent on the website, easier to find. I think that would just help the citizens as they look for and apply for this. What is the grandfathering is 1984, is that correct?
That's when the first land use code was enacted, yes.
And do we know the status of the Frazier case? A briefing was filed in November, and I know they were waiting on the Wilmington case. Do we have an update on that?
The town appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. And we lost. The town lost in Superior Court.
Okay.
And the town has appealed to the North Carolina Court of Appeals. I don't know the status.
Okay. Are we all familiar with that case? 'Cause I'm new to the group, so I'm new to the board.
I guess.
I assume everybody's up to date on the Frazier case?
No.
I'm not.
No.
Could you give us a summary?
EB could.
Well, it's still pending, so I can't really get into any of the facts facts of the case, but I can give you a simple.
Just a high-level summary.
Well, you were curious about where it stands now. It's purely procedural and has nothing to do with the facts or merits. But the Court of Appeals heard the case almost 4 months ago. And there, they say their aim is to get their decision out within 90 days. So I would expect their decision's gonna come anytime now.
Those are my questions. The concern is you want to make sure that you have knowledge of who's doing short-term rental. And I think there are a lot of reasons why the community wants to track that. And if the permit, even the one-time permitting, if that's permissible, that at least gives us something. Another thought is, as hot of a topic as short-term rental is in the country with the companies that are buying houses by the thousands in some of these larger cities, Highlands has just gone through this, and they've enacted some new legislation, some new codes on that. I'm wondering if it might be a time for us to look at short-term rentals and maybe do a subcommittee and do a deep dive and just really take a hard look at this and make sure that we're doing what we can to control short-term rentals. Because based on the discussions I've had with the citizens, it's while we were fine with where the short-term rentals are being conducted now, there's a fear that that's going to leak out into the communities. And I think we just need to make sure that we've got our arms around that so that never happens. And that's a concern based on the survey. So
Was that survey multiple choice or fill in the blank? Or?
we asked them to we did a list of top issues in the community. There was 10 or 12, 15 of them. And we said, based on your family, based on your values, and they also had a box, if it wasn't on the list, they could add something. So it was their list. It was their list. And we're ready to publish that. We just haven't had time to do that yet.
There may be a perception out there that short-term is allowed in residential
Well,
zoning
I think the
districts.
thing is, I don't think people are aware
And it's
of what
not.
the rules are. And it's not, but the general public assumes that you can go into Green Hill and rent a house for a weekend and that's okay.
No, they don't. The general public does not know that. We've been regulating it since the 80s. It's been regulated, it has been brought up. In 2000 is when they added the short-term rental overlay district, which would allow it in the multifamily zones. And only one place has applied for that in 2000, that was Royal Oaks. And at that time, there was a definition for short-term rental. We tweaked that in 2018 and added this permitting process. And every realtor in town knows where you can and cannot do short-term rental. But the thing about the website, that we gathered that from the last council meeting, and we have a map that's been produced, and we'll put that on there in a link. And then just a FAQs, just some basic questions about short-term rental and update this if we have a permit process, if this goes forward. And then that way it's there at the fingertips for most people. But
That'd be good.
people in this community know where you can and can't.
Well, I understand, but we had an issue in our neighborhood where somebody from out of town bought a house and as soon as they closed, they turned it into short-term rentals. And we noticed different cars at the house every weekend, 4 or 5 guys playing golf, and it's like, what are they doing? And it was short-term rental. And they've since sold the home and left the community. But I just think, I think there's a lot of activity with short-term rentals that Speckle Trout's working on property. The restaurant where the Mexican restaurant is, that building just sold to a gentleman in Raleigh, and he's going to do short-term rentals above and remodel upstairs. So there's a lot of discussion and there's a lot of noise about short-term rental, and I just think we need to be, just for the comfort of the community, we need to clearly communicate where we are. And that's just my thought on it. Because I think it's a bigger topic than a lot of people realize, at least in discussion and rumor.
Yeah. I
It'd be
agree.
good if you can get that on the website, then, on the map. Thanks.
Okay.
So Kevin, just to confirm, the only difference here that you guys are recommending is just getting rid of the annual portion of this? So that's how long is this permit good for when they apply for it? Indefinitely?
Yes.
And the reason-
Like if you have a use, a commercial
Sure,
use,
use.
you get a zoning permit or a special use permit, as long as if you had to build the building within a year, or, I mean, you had to start construction within a year or two, depending on the type of permit. And once you do that, then your use is authorized perpetually, I mean, until you change the use.
And then the purpose of this is stemming from this Wilmington case and the ruling there, and the fact that they were doing similar registration process, a yearly process that
They were.
the court has said was illegal for them to do.
That's right, consistent.
Yeah.
And the lottery, honestly, the lottery is probably what got them in trouble. Because someone was authorized to do short-term rental. When the lottery went into effect, they lost that right, and then that's when they filed suit. And without the lottery, they may still be going under the same provisions of their ordinance. But I made the same note at the council meeting about adding a
Okay,
map
thank you.
and some FAQs.
Well, and I think just the security of knowing that nothing's changing, nothing's broadening, none of the rules are changing. It's still limited to a very specific area of town.
Yes, yes. And a majority of that is Chatola.
Yes.
One wordsmithing suggestion on
Okay.
G, last sentence, where you talk about that may lead to a violation of town code. If you just said if it resulted in a notice of violation, then you revoke the zoning permit in accordance with 16-7.5, which is your revocation procedure. I don't know whether that makes it, helps it, or just a suggestion.
Okay.
3 complaints that result in a notice of violation, if any one of those result in a notice of violation.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Is there a motion to recommend the amendment to town council for public hearing?
I make a motion.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second
Sam? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Any other business?
I will tell you, we will have a neighborhood meeting. I just sent notice out, or we just sent notice out today. Blowing Rock Brewery, who we mentioned tonight, they're proposing a new brewery out on the corner of Evanston Road and 321. And so on Wednesday, the 29th, is that the right date? Is it? Wednesday, 29th, at 5 o'clock here, we will have a neighborhood meeting to discuss the plans and meet with the applicant, and you're welcome to come. I encourage you to come.
What road?
Evanston, corner of Evanston and across the street from the Apsky
The brewing facility or brewing? and drinking?
Brewing and draft house.
Cool.
Yeah, full on making beer. Restaurant? No. Just drinking. It's pretty neat, concept.
What time is that meeting? I'm sorry.
5 o'clock.
There will be food service, but not a restaurant.
Like
food trucks.
Food trucks.
No, like pizzas.
Okay.
Snacks. Food, snacks.
Any portable.
Yes. I think they were asking, is that gonna be served at the neighborhood meeting? And beer.
Samples would be a good idea.
That would be smart.
You get everybody in this place.
It's about the smartest thing you can do.
Get everybody on board then.
That helps push it along.
Doesn't it? Grease the skids.
Yeah.
That's all I got.
Any other comments? We'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.